Hey, this is Dan Olerking with Children's Cup. I am super excited to present to you a series of conversations that I've had with pastors, friends of mine. A lot of them are ARC church planters. A lot of them are Children's Cup partners, and they're my friends. And so what we did, we hopped in a car, set up a camera, hop in a car with one of them right around their town and start listening to the stories they tell, pointing things out, or hey, this is where we used to do church, and talking about the story of them starting their church, or the story of how they came to be in ministry, story of their marriage, story. These stories, I believe, will make you laugh. We do a lot of laughing in these videos, but they also, I think, will inspire you. It'll help your faith to grow when you see what others have gone through. They're my friends. I hope that you feel like they're your friends too as you watch these and let God do something in there. Here's the thing. They're unedited. It's unscripted. It's just raw. It's authentic. It's just kind of peeling back and just being two guys riding around in a car talking about God and what he's done. And so it's a lot of fun. I really, really, really enjoy doing this. As I hope as you guys watch, you enjoy it too.
Where'd you go to college?
Central Bible College.
So it's all sealed up. The history is done. Yeah. It's finished.
What's interesting now, I see guys from college. We get together, and sometimes if I haven't seen a guy in a while, they'll be like, "It's under the blood. It's under the blood."
It's so funny because the guys I hang out with it from Evangel, like I went there one semester, but like there wasn't really that much bad. There was bad going on, but there wasn't. It's not like it's notoriously that. But like Central, you guys that were the Bible college students, not the liberal arts college.
Right.
You guys were actually...
Well, it's all the pendulum effect, right? So it's the, when you're Amish,
yeah,
and you leave the Amish community for a minute, they call it Rumspringer, right? Isn't that Rumspringer?
I have not heard that term. Wow.
So they go out for a year. After you get to a certain age, they go for a year, and then they just go on a drunken binge, and they go party and do whatever. They're supposed to sow their wild oats for a year, and then decide whether or not they want to return to the community. And then, so basically it's, a lot of them do return because they get out and it's crazy.
They realize it's more than they want.
But that's the, it's homeschool.
What's the term?
I think it's called Rumspringer.
Rumspringer.
Yeah, Rumspringer. Yeah.
Rumspringer.
Which sounds
really fun.
You
went to Central from, was that your... Rumspringer was for you personally was Central?
No, actually I was pretty good till I graduated.
Okay.
So then I worked at Brooklyn Teen Challenge.
Oh wow.
And then I left there.
So you went down to Springfield for college and just went right back to New York.
Yep.
Okay.
Then when I left Brooklyn Teen Challenge, I went and I was a children's pastor for 4 months. But I was looking at porn during the time that I was there, and I told my pastor. He fired me, which was fantastic. It was really interesting as my first sort of pastoral role, and I never had one in the 4 months time. I never had one staff meeting with him. I was there at the church, but never, I don't think he knew what to do with me.
Yeah.
How to have a staff team, anything like that. There was no, it wasn't even corporate. It was just total neglect. So in my head, I thought, it'd be a good idea to sort of confess this or whatever, and that didn't go well. So it was from there that, of course, I'm a pastor's kid, and so I knew of a bunch of pastors who were looking at porn, but had stayed in their ministry role. And so, sort of the way the district handled it, for those pastors, I used that as an opportunity to get better.
Yeah.
And then from that I went on my Rumspringer from there. This was how that all went down.
Wow.
And so I just went out and lived a Playboy lifestyle after that. Just went buck wild. And did that for several years. Actually, because of that, ended up going back to Springfield, weirdly enough, because I could go to Evangel. and Evangel would take my undergrad
Okay.
And so I didn't have to go back and do a few more years to get. So I went and got my master's degree in organizational leadership.
Huh.
And God has used that. It's interesting. Nothing's wasted. It's all God uses all of it.
How many parts of the story, chapters of my life have been that? Like, I couldn't get to do what I do right now if this terrible thing hadn't happened.
Right. Yeah.
Whether it's somebody's choice or my choice or just a thing in the world, COVID-19 stuff. Like, there's things that we're doing now. There's no way I'd have thought of to do or had the opportunity to do if that bad thing hadn't happened. It's like, I don't know how God does that.
Yeah.
He's God and I'm not.
And it was so wild too, because when I did surrender to the Lord, I told God I'd do anything to be back in ministry. I'll scrub toilets. Whatever it takes to be back in the house of the Lord. And so,
what made you do that before you finish that? What made you get to that point where you said, I'm not going to do this messed around lifestyle. I'm coming back.
I was so unfulfilled in it. So like Solomon said, I denied myself nothing. It says it in Ecclesiastes 1. I denied myself no pleasure. I denied myself nothing. And at the end of the day, it was all meaningless. So guys would come to my office on the weekend, and after the weekend, and they were like, "Tell me how your weekend was." To them, it was like that's the example of what life should be. And
Gotcha.
Even in the telling of my weekend's tale, I'm sitting there like, this is miserable.
Yeah.
I'm lonely. This is not fulfilling. Weekend to weekend for me was just a miserable existence in comparison to having known the Lord.
Yeah.
Like what actual fulfillment looks like. I didn't have a compare and contrast because I grew up in the church. And so I didn't know how truly fulfilling it is to live in Christ, because I just didn't know anything else. So it's just, not that I had so I allowed sin and bitterness to drive me out, but then very much like the prodigal son, realized, holy cow, this is where it is. Yeah, I was lonely and unfulfilled, and really staring down the barrel of how meaningless it was. And this lie, I think that was the thing when I was growing up in church. What the lie was almost that sin, all the good things, God wants to keep you from all the things that will be fun and enjoyable. And like growing up in youth group, they preached against three things: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Yeah. Of which any of those three things isn't necessarily a sin, and one of them probably isn't a sin at all. Right. And so it's just the I would wondered if any of those youth pastors actually knew what a sin was, but the conception of God was skewed because of that. Or
I'm sure,
or I shouldn't say that. I should say that I allowed that to become a skewed perception of God, because I went to Bible college, so it's not like I'll be like, oh, I claim ignorance.
Yeah, I get you.
It's something was in my heart wanted to rebel.
Yeah.
So I did, and then when I did surrender to God, I told God, as hard as I ran from you, I'm going to run toward you. Yeah. And so I get to this moment, I'm married, I'm working a career, I come home and I tell my wife, I said, Crystal, I want to quit my job and I'm going to start an after-school mentoring program at church. And that, her jaw dropped. And that was like,
was she following Christ at that point?
She was. We were marginal attenders. Okay. Like I even though I was running from God, I would still bring I would bring the girl from Saturday night. I would drag her to church with me on Sunday morning.
Oh wow!
It was really interesting. And I guess in Springfield, Missouri, that wasn't that weird.
There's a lot of weird things about Springfield, Missouri, but that's probably...
That was like,
that would be
apparently, no one ever questioned it. It was just like, oh, I guess we're going to church. He's a really good guy.
Wow. Even better, because he's a believer. That's awesome, yeah. Maybe this is okay what we're doing.
It was very unusual. So then I get to where I do that, and then I go to my pastor's office, and I tell him I want to start this after-school mentoring program. And so he calls me about a week later and says there's a part-time children's pastor position available at one of the other locations.
Wow.
And so I was like, well, thanks, but no thanks, because I had the one experience where I was the children's pastor before, and my wife says, Will, at least there's some pay involved.
Right.
So you should at least think about it. So I called the pastor back, and I went and interviewed at that location, and I didn't say anything about any children's ministry experience or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the pastor, I said, look, I'm going to tell you how this is. I've been running from God. If you hire me, it's going to get really awkward if some of these girls show up here at the church, because I've been running around town, and like I'm downtown in the downtown scene and
Springfield downtown scene.
Yeah, which is not that big, right?
It's enough to get in trouble, but
small downtown, so everybody knows everybody. And so then then the other thing I said is I also love pornography, and if I'm gonna go down, you need to know that up front, and you got to hold me accountable. Like, I'm not going to be able to be here if you don't call me on the carpet. Because one of the commitments I had made to the Lord was, when I go back into ministry, I'm not going to have a double life.
Yeah.
What was happening was I had this secret thing that was going on in it, and I had refused. When it's time for me to go back in, I refuse the secrecy. Mm-hmm. I'm going to live in a place of open confession and in a place of open accountability, and just live that way. And so what was interesting was the prior 3 children's pastors had been fired for pornographic, like they had all been downloading porn at church, and had the prior 3 had been fired for that very reason. And the pastor looks at me and he says, I think this can work. And I was like, this guy has
I just told you 8 reasons why not to hire me.
Yeah, I didn't say anything about children's ministry. I had no, I gave him the worst resume. I was just telling him, here's all of my sins, and he's going to hire me. I don't understand this at all. So, it's the reverse psychology, I guess.
Wow.
So that was it. That was probably the one place I could interview ever and tell the pastor, this is how jacked up I am. And the guy took a chance, and from there, it was about the only road I could, hindsight on that. I just realized that had to have been God that orchestrated all of that for me to be able to go.
For real.
And what that actually became for me was the beginnings of what the church plant.
So how long from that time till you launched Two Rivers?
So that was probably 2006 or 2007 maybe. And then we launched Two Rivers in July of 2013, so 6 years later.
Okay.
And that was this, at the time we started the church, one of the things we'd say is we want to be a real church for real people with real problems. And so it was really important to me that you didn't have to come and be fake. You could come just as you are.
Yeah.
And then we have a little phrase, you could look like, act like, talk like, vote like, and smell any way you want to at church. And so that has really resonated with people in our community, because it's one of those things. I think everyone wants to have a place where
Yeah.
They can really be known. One of the things people say, everyone needs to be known and needed.
Yeah.
And you can never
that.
be known without, like, I keep hearing people criticize churches talking about this idea that in a church you always have to be fake, or people are fake in a church. And I'm like, that's not in a church. Just take the in a church off of that.
Right. It's just
people
life.
are just fake.
Yeah.
Period. Because what we learn is that if I actually let you in and I let you see who I am, you're going to criticize me. You're going to, and so everybody lives in a guarded way.
Yep.
So one of the things that people find very remarkable is if you can create an environment in which people actually can risk that level of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And to actually sort of be valued, loved, and accepted in that way.
Yeah. Where
we could confess our sins one to another. I think I heard a story one time about what's the guy that was out in Jim Bakker?
Oh yeah.
Jim Bakker's son, Jay Bakker, had a kind of like a teen ministry in New York City where they were celebrating not how long you were. They would celebrate like when you relapsed. So if you went 3 days without using, and now you came in and you say, look, I messed up, but I was clean for 3 days, they would celebrate that. And it wasn't this, oh my gosh, how terrible that you have now failed.
Right.
It was, look how great it is that you went for 3 days. Because prior to that, how long was it that you lived clean? There was nothing. And that was such an interesting reframe to me of what it looked like to be a culture of grace.
Yeah.
And to be a culture of, because it was always, well, if I ever said I did something wrong, then
you'd be shot down right then.
Yeah, there was no celebration of the season of life or the season of holiness, or the season.
Actually, what your guy said back in 2006, what he actually did wasn't, hey, let's celebrate that you're coming straight, but that you're being honest. He celebrated, so to speak, by hiring you anyway.
Yeah.
Just saying, hey, I see
so it was this reward scenario for me saying, hey, I'm going to walk in the light.
Yeah.
Which up to that point, every other institution sort of, like, that's why I say there's no such thing as a Christian college, because the moment you have sort of the law brings death, but the Spirit brings life. And so the only way for something to actually be Christian is for it to have the Spirit. There has to be this life-giving presence. And it wasn't until I got to ARC that I discovered the phrase life-giving.
Yeah.
So I actually, for my master's program at the end, as I was working on my master's degree, I had to do a capstone project, and I had like an 85-page paper, and it was in a church, doing a organizational assessment of a church. And I was trying to define what is a growing church and looking at through the lens of kind of like a quality process. And 85 pages of trying to figure out how do you describe a church that's growing. And then I get to ARC, and it's done in 2 words. Life-giving. Everything else was taken care of. So it was really like when I discovered the ARC crowd, that to me was like instantaneous gravitation, like, because this is what church ought to be. This is what I think life should look like.
Yeah.
And so that really was a big.
It's funny. There's so much time we've spent on trying to figure out how do you define life-giving, and I think life-giving is the definition for how do you define what church is the way Jesus intended, or what was Jesus? How did Jesus do it? Life-giving is the definition.
Yeah.
Like it's a very self-explanatory term.
Yeah.
Greg Surratt's thing, he said, people ask him all the time, he said, well, I can tell you what it isn't. Right. You ever been around a church that's life sucking?
Right.
You ever been around people that are life sucking? This is not that,
Yeah.
That's probably all the things that make me love ARC. That's the thing. It's all the other stuff in there that ARC does and the way we do things. I love it. Great little people I love in there, but it's the lunch we just had with Pierre and Mark Rouse and Mark Kaiser having. That was a life-giving conversation. We didn't get real deep with stuff.
Yeah.
But you walk out of that just a little bit lighter. Like you can get your head down, busy working and trying to figure out how to do this and that, and you just get around those guys for a little bit, or play golf. And Pierre tells you how to play golf.
Yeah.
You didn't need him to tell you how to do something at church.
Right.
You need him to help you with your swing.
Yeah.
And he did.
And that's where there's so many things inside of Christianity that we read about it, and then somehow culturally churches get stuck doing some things that it's sort of what you read and should be taking place. The culture inside of a church gets stuck doing some things that are outside of what that paradigm is.
Yeah.
And that's really the biggest challenge in sort of the post-launch, like what do you do after you launch? You got ARC will lead you through, get you launched.
Yeah.
And then at that point, what do you do now?
Yep.
And that stewardship of helping people to risk vulnerability, because without that, they'll never experience transformation.
Right.
Because you can profess Christ and then just hide. I got sick to death in Springfield of all the people hiding behind this language. Like, how are you doing today, brother? Fantastic. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord.
Yep.
I don't even know what you just said,
brother. Yeah, you didn't say anything.
I don't know what you just said.
You didn't say anything because they're just and hey, grunts to you. It's just grunts. Yeah. And
there's the form of godliness, but denies the power thereof. There's this so close to the thing that could bring transformation and bring life and bring health, and just be missing it. And so that became very important to me to maintain that.
And I think the open honesty is a great groundwork for, or not groundwork, it's the great environment, like the pot that you put a plant in, the dirt, whatever. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but like you create an environment by being open and honest for people to believe when you're saying I'm giving you something that's life, or you look like it could be good, but is it really?
Yeah.
And then when you're in that environment of honesty and nobody's sitting there thinking that well, you're perfect, so everything you say, that's a pressure nobody can handle. But anyway, I think the people that come, that are in your community, or that don't come, they're just watching from outside, they're seeing, oh, there's something different, because it's not we're perfect, come be like us. It's we're experiencing God's grace, come be like us.
Yeah, that was my wife and I. We do a marriage group, and one of the things we will do in the first marriage session is tell some kind of horror story from our marriage, and then just get it real raw. Maybe not the first night, but somewhere
so
early
would be like, oh, I ain't
these guys are really messed up. So we'll get really raw at some, like, early into the group.
Yeah.
And the moment we do that, then everyone else sort of relaxes, like, okay, pastor and his wife are actually real, and then everybody calms down, and then they'll start talking about their issues.
Yeah.
And stop pretending that they get everything together, and then we can get down to business and start actually growing together.
Yeah.
And we talk about, in my wife and I, we say, how broken do we need to be so that other broken people can get their healing?
Yeah.
Like how in front of everyone else, how vulnerable do we have to get?
Yeah.
how open and honest do we have to get in front of these other people, which is it's challenging. It's
because when do you finally get to be like, but we're okay now?
Right.
Like, you never get that real footing if you're always relaying your horror stories.
So we try to always do like we always try to do this is a story of something that we've walked through, like we're on the other side of it, rather than like in the middle of that's where we like, if I'm saying, hey, this is my struggle, here's how I've overcome. We always try to only share the ones where, okay, now we've overcome connected to that. Doesn't mean we don't have the stuff we're struggling with right now.
Those are stories to tell yet.
That doesn't work real well.
There's a different place to tell that story.
Yeah.
When you think about like your family, and you know, I do this. I'll think about, there are parts of family life that I just really, really enjoy right now. There are parts that are like, I do it because I have to, like changing the air filter. I hate taking care of stuff at the house. Mm-hmm. There are some people, they thrive on that. The whole let's go pick weeds in the garden. Like, that's not me. I don't enjoy keeping up with a home, so to speak. But I love, like, my kids playing golf now. I love going to play golf with them. I love sitting down reading something. My 20-year-old is writing screenplays and poems and stuff. I'm reading that stuff. I love going to see a movie with my kids and like dissecting it. A movie like Tenet. We just watched Tenet. Dude, that movie would make your brain hurt. But I love doing that. I love hearing, you know, sitting down with Vicky, just hearing what's going on in her day. Those parts I love. But there's parts of family that I love, and then there's parts of home life family that I'm like, you know, it's like something I have to do. Is that healthy, or is it like you're supposed to, like, I'm just supposed to be, I don't know. I'm not saying picking a favorite kid. You don't do that. But there are parts of family that I really enjoy this right now in this season. Mm-hmm. What would that be for you?
What do I really enjoy from my family in this season?
That you get to do, that you get to participate in. Not like I enjoy watching, you know, enjoy knowing that this is happening, but like that you actually get to engage with your family.
Well, right now is that my kids are 3 kids, 10, 8, and 6, and just in the last couple of years, I don't have to carry them into the house. I don't have to I can get out of the car, walk into the house, and I didn't carry anything with me. I tell the kids, get up. Come on, kids, get it. We're home.
They got 2 legs.
I'm going in. When you guys come in, that's fantastic.
I'll leave the front door open. Come on when you're ready.
I'm so scarred by that season where we had multiple littles in diapers, and the diaper bags, and the car seats, and the carrying of multiple children back and forth. I'm so, like, we had just planted a church. We decided it was a great idea.
How long have you planted the church?
So we're now 7 years in.
So you had 3 and 1.
So I had one who was 1. My daughter was 1 year old when we moved to Binghamton.
Okay.
And my wife was pregnant with number 2.
Okay.
So we had number 2 a month before we launched. So no, he was. So let me get that straight.
You still got pregnant with the third one.
He was 5 months. Yeah, of course. So he was 5 months old when we launched the church. Okay. So then we were, I guess, had just tipped over into year 2 when we had, or a year and a half in, and we had our number 3. So between all of that, like new babies, church planting.
Yeah, it all stacks up.
I was like that whole season.
Because you had kids then that you probably have, if one's asleep, you're carrying the one and carrying the other.
Yeah, and it's multiple trips,
Yeah.
I used to wonder if there was some kind of competition for how long you could hold.
Oh yeah.
30 pounds dead, length of time.
You didn't have to wake up and do push-ups in the morning either.
No, it was
done.
Yeah. So I can't tell you how wonderful it is to me this sounds so crazy, but
I understand.
when I get out of the car, when you ask that question, that's the thing that brings me so much joy right now. It sounds selfish because it is totally selfish. I have no. Like that to me is found time. That's like such a great gift that my kids are.
My kids,
they can talk to me. I can tell them to go do things, and they go do them, and it works.
You know what's fun? What's coming for you if
crazy.
you haven't already had a hint of it? I'm sure you have, but it's when you really start understanding how much they think. Like when you get that moment. I had this. I mean, I've known this about our kids here and there, but my 20-year-old wrote something the other day, and I read it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like he thinks deep, like and it like challenges my thinking, and not challenges like disagrees, but challenges like, do I really understand what he's saying here? And I'm like, man, this is a little freaky when you're old enough that your kids are like, doing that. But there is a joy in that when your kids. I always try to remember, hey, don't rush it. You know, when you have your fourth kid, don't rush the thing of her not walking yet. You know, but there is that. But you didn't balk at the fourth kid idea, Crystal. You got that right. But there's this. You know, there's the freedom when our twins, our last two were twins, when they started walking, and I remember that moment. And you walk in, you're like, I don't have to carry nobody. This is awesome. You know.
Yeah. That's the.
What about church? What is it when you think about not so much? Well, I'll just leave it open. When you think about church, what do you enjoy about being a pastor?
Transform lives. That's I get a real kick out of watching people who had a radically different story, and then they're getting so. This is another compare and contrast thing that has to just be. So when I was in Springfield, I would witness. I'd go share Jesus with people out on the streets. Like even when I was running from God, I'd hear people talking about God in a bar, and I'd have to go get involved and be like, "Nah, that's not right.
Oh wow,
that's incorrect.
Let me straighten you out here.
Right? This
Buy me a beer and I'll straighten you out."
Yeah.
In Springfield.
And interestingly, I never had a conversation with anyone in Springfield where they didn't know the scriptures.
Right.
Like they all knew the scriptures. They all knew what it was. So when I got to Binghamton, New York, it was the complete opposite.
A lot of people just don't know.
Nothing.
Wow.
Nothing at all.
Not growing up in church or anything.
Like they'll be in the lobby of the church and then use an expletive to describe how good the church is.
Yeah.
Right?
Like so it's a good church service.
This is so great. Which was so refreshing to me.
Yeah.
Because they don't know. Like
dang straight.
One of the pastors on my team right now who's ex-drug addict, drug dealer. He's now one of my community pastors. And he's still I pray about Lord, should I talk to him about his language? Because if you ever meet somebody and they just curse art, it's artistic, and it doesn't sound like cussing coming out of his voice, out of his mouth.
It's beautiful.
It sounds I know that seemed pretty not like cussing. If I'd have said it, it would have been very vulgar. But it's not. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah.
So, weirdly enough, I get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, the innocence of these people who are coming to Jesus. They're really pure. So we did this thing. We had we were helping people to get baptized in the Holy Spirit, and one of the girls gets baptized in the Holy Spirit, and she goes to Facebook and she posts, and she's just cussing, "Holy effing, it's real, that God is real, everyone, this is so," and just the whole thing is that all the way through.
That's
and
not
she's
one of the tones she picked up. She was cussing before all this.
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah.
Okay, making sure.
So that was I wouldn't say that was her ecstatic expression from the Lord, but it was an ecstatic expression.
Yeah.
And just the purity of
yeah,
running into people who they don't know They've been to church. And as they're coming in, they're discovering God. It's for them. They run out and they tell all their friends. You don't have to tell somebody.
Right.
If you have an encounter with Jesus, you don't have to tell them, now go tell everybody about this.
Right.
They just go tell everybody about it because it's that radical and that life-changing.
There's so many pastors, I feel like, and I'd never put myself in a spot of accusing. I don't mean to say that, but I feel like that joy that got them into pastoring in the first place, got them into ministry in the first place, of transformed lives, that is somehow, it's fading, or it's a distant, or such a small portion of what they occupy themselves with. It's sure that's the thing that brings the most joy, but that's the least amount of their occupation is actually experiencing those moments. And I think part of it, some of the time, I feel like it's because there's a lot of times we're not prepared, we're not trained for it. Nobody takes the time to prepare us of how do you run a business of a church, or how do you take care of making sure that all your legal stuff's there, and hey, you got these systems you got to put in, and you got to make sure you do this if you're going to grow your church. And you forget about, man, it's just that one lady who came whose life was messed up, and now she found Jesus and she's excited and she's cussing on Facebook because she's so excited about it, you know. How do you occupy yourself with? Is it just the sheer joy of it that keeps you sucked into that, or is there something you have to do intentionally to make sure? Because you're running a great business. Yeah. Your church is a great business the way you're doing it, but it's not just that.
So I practice disruption. So I am continuously disrupting my rhythm. I think I watch guys, and it terrifies me. I don't want to get into a rhythm. I watch. I've been in ministry since I was a kid. You know, as a pastor's kid, you see your entire life people living out certain patterns in ministry, and you watch the ups and downs and ebbs and flows of everything. And one of the things that I've watched is I just watch guys get into a certain rhythm where they will all talk about this day, future. I've been praying for revival for the last 30 years. And they've done nothing in the meantime. Like they think whatever, they're not happy with today's results or what's happening right now. And so they think if they just continue to keep on doing the same thing, they're going to get something different. Mm-hmm. And so I have this thing where I am continuously wanting to break my rhythm to go do something a little bit different and shake up. I believe in rhythms. But part of that has to be, we have to purposefully disrupt what we're doing in order to see differences and different results.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, for COVID has been this awesome rhythms. It's been an awesome disruption.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is in the middle of that, it's been this amazing exposer. Yeah. Right? It's exposed a ton of stuff in our hearts, but also sort of in how we have to pastor, or how we have to reach people, or what it's got to take to change all that out. But it's the idea that, okay, now everything has changed. Like the world fundamentally changed.
Yeah.
Very rapidly. Things have fundamentally changed, and the church is still trying to figure out, how do we change to?
Right.
Like, can I just go back to doing everything that I was doing?
Just go back to normal.
And that's where, if you don't have a rhythm of disruption, then that's going to be incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
But that disruption allows you to, get out, go be with people again, go.
I think that's something that
get connected to lost people.
The change that's forced upon everybody, all 7.5 billion of us, there's a change been forced upon us. Like, I think there are some people who say they like change, but they don't like change. Yeah. There's some who openly tell you I don't like change, and that's there. Obviously, that's real. But then I think there's, again, maybe I'm one of those who says I like change, but I really don't. I think we all relish something fresh.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't necessarily want to pay the price to get to what's fresh, because it means we got to let go of something that's old and stale.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and maybe that's partly degrees. Where there's some, like, for the most part, I really do enjoy change. I've lived in, I think now there's 42 different places I've lived in 54 years, 42 different homes, and I'm I feel at home anywhere. It's not like I don't have a home. I'm fish out of water wherever I am. No, I feel like I can fit in wherever I go. That's part of who I am. So the change in general doesn't bother me, but I'm sure you change enough things, I'll get uncomfortable. When I think with the changes of COVID-19 and the opportunity we have as the church to what Pierre Duplessis was telling me this morning is like God has uncreated some things. Like, okay, maybe not the right theological word there, but I get the point. Like we had the way things were, and it falls apart. Sin makes things fall apart, but God's not a victim of that. He's in control. So He's saying, "Hey, I want to let this thing, let it fall apart. It's old. It's done. That's the old way. There's a new thing I want to do. Let me create some new order out of this chaos." And I get excited about that. I'm like, man, we get to. I don't have to wear a necktie to church anymore. I'm thankful that at some point that deteriorated and didn't become a thing. That's a whatever. But the way we've been doing church, I just feel like, or not just church, but ministry as the body of Christ, as the church, the way I'm going to reach my neighbor. There's no more falling back to, hey, come to church with me Sunday. That's how I witness to people.
Right.
How do you? It's like the responsibility is back on us. If we want to see those transformed lives that fire you up, it can't just be, hey, come to my church. I have to do something else if I want to see that. So the disruption, man, it's on us. That's for sure.
And that's what's interesting in that. I think one of the things that's revealed for me when I went to plant Two Rivers, there was this incredible sense of God has to come through.
Yeah.
This radical dependence.
Because you're planting a church and you've never done this before.
Oh man, so radically dependent on God, right? This is, and one of the things that I noticed about a year and a half into the plant, for the first 2 years, so like prior to launch and then the first year of the launch, I was trusting in God for provision. Yeah. I didn't think, okay, the provision comes from the people in the seats.
Right. Yeah.
I had
I know where you're going. Yeah.
idea. None of that wasn't on my radar screen at all. Yeah. Somewhere I realized all of a sudden, I thought, you know what? I need these people. Yeah. And I realized there was this moment when I thought that I thought, how did that happen?
Yeah.
How did I shift from I'm trusting in God 100%
now I don't have to trust God so much
to now I need these people.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I had to immediately do was repent of that, because I didn't need the people. There was nothing. I didn't have a building. I didn't have money. I didn't have people, but I was trusting in God. All of a sudden, I had a building and people and money, and I wasn't trusting in God anymore. and I'll tell you what, right now, half of the stress that I talk to my friends is because they are facing a moment that they are being stripped away from all the things that they may not, and not one of them, I honestly don't think any one guy would say, yeah, I'm trusting in all of these things, these peoples and processes and all that. Because you could take away people, money. It could be the process. It could be the method. It could be whatever.
Yeah,
there's something, I went to this one thing, and now this is my hope and all of. At some point, when God strips and takes that all away, are we trusting in Him 100%?
Yeah.
And that's where there has to be this radical dependence on God. And then the disruption cycle becomes actually enjoyable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? You can experience the joy of discovering God show up again.
Yeah.
And because when you talk to guys, you spend enough time around churches launching, they just talk about miracles. This miracle happened in order for this thing to happen. This thing wasn't going to work until God did this. And then I needed miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle for the church to get established.
Yeah.
And then later on, that all shifts to I did this, and I did this, and I did this.
Or it's disguised behind, hey, our team did this.
Yeah.
It's still not God did this.
Yeah. And that will...
Wow.
You'll lose the adventure.
Yeah.
Because when you're planning a church, that's Adventure City.
Do you feel like the disruption, if you're trusting God and then there's a disruption, that it's an opportunity to trust God from a different angle? It's not a derailment of what God had planned. It's a disruption that it puts you in a little different angle. So you see, if God is really that big, you see it from a different angle. Like, oh, yeah, he's still God. So the disruption, that's part of the joy of it, is I get to experience God coming through in a new way.
It's got to be. And like for me, I had this word from God where I know God spoke to me and I know God sent me. So I have this if everything goes haywire, I still have this sense that God is 100% got this. Yeah. And, you know, we've been through some crazy times as a church. We had our trailer broken into and all of our gear was stolen. We had a car drive into the side of the building while we were in church. Somebody ran into the building. Wow. We lost our facility 3 times. Like, we had to move to other locations. Wow. We've had just all kinds of insane things happen. I've had death threats. I've had, just whatever. But inside of all of that, yeah, that's right.
She threatened you more than once.
No. So inside of all of that, I just have this sense, like when the trailer was broken into, I sent an email out to the church and I just said, I bet you that what we do is we show up and we worship a little harder and we have a little more, like it wasn't like, oh, that's the end.
Right.
It became another opportunity for God to show up.
Yeah.
It just,
I like that.
There's a joy in knowing that God's got this.
Because here's the deal. He's the one who had the idea for you to plant this church.
Yeah.
He called you to do it. He loves the people of Binghamton more than you do.
Yes.
So why would all of a sudden, this trailer got stolen, now God's wringing his hands trying to figure out what to do? I don't think so.
Yeah, so if you can rest in that, then it becomes really liberating and very like, all right, so that all of this now becomes an adventure rather than if I'm trusting in our equipment,
right?
Or I'm like, I got to have XYZ to do any of this. Well, if I needed that, God will supply it. So,
and I'm not like advocating for you just to sit around and wait for God to do something. But I think there is that when there's this, hey, there's nothing we could do. No, you know what? Can you lock your trailer up better? Was that, I don't know.
Right.
But you have to evaluate those things, but you also don't look back and say, wow, this really threw God's plan off.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. God's plan never gets thrown off.
Yeah.
It's just so weird. He's outside of time. Tenet movie, mess with your head on the whole thing, all that. But the whole...
Is that the Christopher Nolan?
Oh my gosh, yes, that you need to see that movie. But it does make, in our conversations about it, it keeps coming up, and this whole thing of God is outside of time. So he can take our bad decisions or bad things that happen to us and make it part of the plan that he's had all along for using us to help people get to heaven.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned, and I guess I'm learning still, is this idea about seeing things through an eternal perspective. Something that Jonathan Stockstill shared with me. We were waiting in line at Apple Store, and we were talking and stuff, and he'd asked about my dad had just died, a friend of ours had just died, and I said something about heaven feeling closer, and I just see things differently. He said, that's what God, if God really wants to bless you, that's one of the greatest blessings he can give, is to let you see life through an eternal perspective. It's eternity. And so when you do that, you know what, the trailer being gone, if there's a grief about that, it's not because your church isn't going to grow as fast. You won't be able to tell people at a lunch table, hey, I got 250 people in my church, you know. Right. That's not the grief about it. The grief would be, if there's a legitimate grief, it's going to be, man, is this going to hold us back from reaching more people?
Right.
And even then, God's more excited about accelerating your reaching people than you are.
Yep.
You know, if it's the right kind of excitement about it, then it's if it's not the selfish ambition part of it. It's just so weird. I think that's hard for you. Struggle with that, like that. Hey, growing your church means more people going to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But growing your church is also like you can get out of whack with. I'm all about God to grow our church. This goes back to the first thing you said. Is it you either see more people come to church or see more people's transformed lives?
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
I think it's easy when you're being faithful to confuse who owns what.
Yeah.
Like I own the hustle. God owns the results. And it's easy to confuse the two things. Like you are entirely responsible for how hard you work.
Yeah.
God is entirely responsible for the results.
Yeah.
And that's I think in the end
hard.
When and I counsel a lot of guys, like a lot of pastors and church planners, and some they're in the season of what in their minds is failure. And I'm always interested by what that eternal clock is, because if you were to talk to David about he's been anointed king and now he's in the cave of Adullam, or he's in where was it the Philistines' palace and he's letting drool run down his chin.
It's a season of failure.
Or he's over at is that God positioning him and setting him up for the moment that he can go into? I don't know. Sometimes we have to go through what we think is failure, and it was entirely just a matter of positioning.
Yeah. Well, you think about Bathsheba, David and Bathsheba, like that. Clearly, it was a failure. Like, there's no question about it. Yeah. But it's still something God used in the rest of David's life to make him what he. I mean, Solomon came from Bathsheba. Yeah. My goodness, how did that happen? Yeah, was that a curveball that God just happened to get lucky and hit? Right. Or is it? No, this is. I don't. That's where my mind gets blown.
Yeah, that's that whole what. But it is easy to make that leap to think, okay, success is anything other than obedience.
Right.
And so if God calls you to something, that's the other. How do I insulate myself from failure?
Yeah.
How do I insulate myself from success? In man's standard of success or failure, we have to be insulated from both of those things.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, the fear of God and the fear of man, right? So the scripture has tons. Do I fear God or do I fear man? Because if I fear man, then it will be revealed in how much do I listen to man, how much do I want to please men, how much do I want adulation from men, or do I fear God? And so Saul feared men. When Saul had the kingdom stripped away from him, his excuse to Samuel was, I was afraid of the men.
Yeah.
Because he was supposed to sacrifice all of the plunder.
Yeah.
He was supposed to give all of the plunder to the Lord. And they kept the best things.
Because he was afraid of the men.
And his inability to fear God cost him the kingdom.
Yeah.
And I think that's a critical thing to keep us, like the fear of God in comparison to the fear of men. It is so important that my one audience member be God.
So what you said a second ago about the definition of success and failure is 100% based on our obedience or disobedience to God.
Yeah.
Like that's a good one to end on.
Yeah, because it's not it's not consequential. Like if I'm obedient, then all these good things happen.
Right. Because you could obey. Victor Plymire, you know that story.
Yes.
High Adventure in Tibet.
Yeah.
Dude,
Love
he
it.
obeyed God, went out there for 30 whatever years, and it was just like there's no fruit to speak of. I'll tell you what though, this is a personal story with him. He came to speak at the church my dad was at. My dad's a little 4 years old. And my grandpa was always the church that guest speakers of state.
Right.
So Victor Plymire is sitting in a chair in my dad's home, and my dad runs into the living room, and Victor Plymire looks at my dad. He said, asked him his name, asked him how old he was. He's 4 years old. And he said, what's your name? He said, David. He said, I had a son named David. And he died, and we had to bury him. And he said, Victor Plymire, I looked him in the eye. I said, would you take my son's place as a missionary? And that planted a seed. My dad had a journey before he got there, but he ended up going to be a missionary, knowing that seed was planted by Victor Plymire. So there's fruit from Victor Plymire that's still bearing fruit today with Children's Cup, with all my life being in ministry, all of it. That he's called to Tibet, but yet what he's doing is having impact in Honduras.
I read that book, High Adventure in Tibet, when I was probably in second grade. And I felt like God called me into ministry.
Come on.
Reading that book. I met his son.
And it's out of print, man. That book needs to get back in print.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Right? So, the other thing that's crazy about that, so he lost his wife, Victor Plymire did. And they buried her in China. When the Communist Revolution came, there was all the documentation of churches were wiped out in China, and what allowed the Assemblies of God to return to China and send missionaries into China, or even to have a church established in China, they had to have proof of a prior church existence. And the only proof of that was the death certificate from the grave plot from Victor Plymire's wife.
Wow.
And that was the only way that the church was allowed to go back into China. It was through her grave site that now, because she was dead, they had access back into China again. So stuff that you obedience.
You have no way of knowing
obedience is the only thing that matters.
Wow.
And then after that, the results belong to God. Everything else, you can't see it. That's why Hebrews 11, the Faith Hall of Fame, everybody forgets, 39 and 40, the last two verses.
Some of them were sawn in two.
And these never received the promises because God had something better.
Right.
So you ever get discouraged in faith, just go read that verse. They never received what had been promised because God had something better in mind. And that's like one of my that's like the best phrase. There's something better. You thought you were believing for something good. God had something better.
And here's the thing, I can hear pastors right now in their minds saying, okay, so when does my church grow? And I'm just like, I want to just be like, man, the sooner you let go of that being the only definition of I've fulfilled my calling.
Mm-hmm.
Fulfilling your calling is not seeing Two Rivers have 40,000 people in it.
Right.
That's not fulfilling your calling. Fulfilling your calling is, what did he call you to do?
Yeah.
Pastor a church.
Yep.
Pastor a community. Just do that and watch what I do, what God does.
Go love people.
Go love people, man. See a transformed life. And here's the thing. You enjoy that. That's the fruit you get to enjoy. You ate that pear off the tree on the golf course today. Like, you earned that. Your last hole was great.
That was good.
You earned that pear. But, you got the fruit. Sometimes we don't... Victor Plymire didn't get to eat much fruit.
Yeah.
Did a heck of a lot of planting.
Yeah.
But he's still... He knows... I mean, he's in heaven. He's seeing what's happening in China.
Yeah.
And now he knows. Like, there's something better God had to show him. He's like, let me let you watch your ministry from up here while we sit here and eat grapes.
Mm-hmm.
Let me let you watch it from this box seat that we have. And I didn't know that about the part of his story. I knew the whole thing about his fruit being stuff that came after his life. but didn't know that.
So, I don't know if it's Jonathan Plummer or David. What's his son? David.
So he had another son that they
named him both David.
I think what it was. I think it was like John David or something. Was there was
the first one,
or maybe when he talked to my dad, he said, "I have a son named David, and I had another son that died." That may be what it was.
So because I think I met David.
Yeah.
Plymire, and he might have told me that, or it might be in the book. Who knows where that information comes from? I'm pretty sure it's true.
We'll check it before we put it.
I'm pretty sure that's true.
Pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure.
We'll go with it. We'll just take the names out.
Yeah.
God needs our help. God needs our help to make this story better.
Hey, I hope that inspired you. We're always looking for ways we can inspire and encourage. So if you know other pastors or leaders you'd like to hear a conversation like that with, put that in the comments below.